Good Fun Podcast Network.
This podcast is brought to you by our friends at Linode. Whether you're working on a personal project or managing your enterprise's infrastructure, Linode has the pricing, support, and scale you need to take your project to the next level. Get started on Linode today by going to linode.com/remote-ruby.
This is Remote Ruby.
Have you any remote idea to the meaning of the word?
What's up? What's up?
Hey, what's going on?
Howdy.
I've been doing all the fun things this week. I tried out Stimulus Reflex today, like at work. So, yeah. It's
Secret feature?
I don't know yet. I just tried it on like switching between tabs on the same page without doing a page refresh. Just something.
We do that.
Something to like slide it in and be like, what's up? Look how easy this was. And like, it's a really simple feature. So people are like, oh my gosh, that's so simple. We should just use that for everything. It's a little bit of trickery, but.
Table filtering too is a good one.
Oh yeah. Sorting and whatever for kind of building your own like data tables kind of thing. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I reached out to Nate earlier this week and he offered to help me set it up. So hopefully gonna meet back up with him. I think I got most of it working. We have not a complex, but a more involved like Webpack setup because we like slice things in between like our CMS and our front end and stuff. And not only that, we're in the middle of in our CMS, like we drew a line in the sand and we're doing like Bootstrap 4. But it's like a whole project. It's not just Bootstrap 4, like it's a full design system. So inside our CMS, we have like our old stuff and our new stuff. So it's a little like there's a few roads to wind down, but
Yeah. I need to reach out to Nate again, or I forgot to message him yesterday because I was redoing the Trello series with Stimulus Reflex and boy, it's so easy for the like base examples, but then, some of the trickery gets into how do you broadcast those changes out to other users? Yeah.
Anyway, I will report back next week and we can talk more in depth about how it goes since we have a guest with us today.
Wait. Before we introduce, I have one very important thing to say. If among you Ruby developers are sleeping on Hatchbox, you are making a fool of yourself because you are missing out on the lucky charms of deploying your apps. That's all I have to say.
That's pretty funny. I liked waking up to that tweet of yours this morning.
Oh my God, it was life-changing. The problem was I saved so much time with Hatchbox that I started doing other stuff that, always leads to Tailwind. So productivity lost. All right, sorry, that's it. Try Hatchbox. You're really missing out on the knees of the bee.
I like it. Yeah, so our guest today is Jared White, the author of Bridgetown Ruby. So you want to give yourself an introduction, Jared?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm actually just here to talk about Hatchbox. Let's do that.
I'm so ready.
I like it.
Just a couple days ago, I started playing around with that and I was like, wow, I should have done this ages ago. This is awesome.
It's funny. Like I've had kind of last few months, like an idea of rewriting quite a bit of the underlying stuff because originally it would deploy just to a single server, but then things get kind of infinitely more complex when you add multiple servers in the mix. And I want to support like, it should be reasonable to deploy like PHP too, deploy like a WordPress site along with your Rails app or whatever on the same server. So I just started working on some of the, rewrite of the internals to maybe build version 2 that will be able to handle a lot of that better and maybe get rid of some of the dependencies that are kind of a pain. It's like, weird things like apparently Let's Encrypt doesn't maintain their Ubuntu packages anymore, which are still their recommended install. So it's strange. There's been a weird amount of things that I've learned about maintaining Rails servers that I don't particularly need to know, but I do know them now. So Yeah.
Well, basically, you're doing all the hard work so I can dump all my homegrown shell scripts and just click a button.
Pretty much. That's like the goal, where it's like, you just shouldn't have to learn all these stupid nuances for every little thing. And so, that's really good to hear because it's been a nightmare amount of work, but the end experience is like, I want to run migrations by default for you and all those things you kind of want from Heroku that they don't do out of the box, and just give you a little bit nicer of an experience or whatever, or as best as I can on your own server. So kind of good to hear.
Don't bring up Heroku configuration. I will leave.
It's, I understand all the reasoning for their, requirements these days. Cause I'm like, yeah, there's not a great way to pull off a lot of these things unless you build it like Heroku does. But yeah, there are probably just going to be limitations of Hatchbox at some point, Yeah, so that's good to hear. Anyways,
So anyway, Bridgetown. So yeah, quick summary of who I am. I've been designing and building websites for what seems like forever now, actually. For a while, it was cool to be like, oh, I've been in this business a while, but now I just feel like an old guy. But yeah, basically like late 90s, got into the web in its early days. And really, I was just putting websites up for myself or whatever I was doing at the time, bands and things. And then somebody came along and said, hey, that's cool. I need this website thing everyone's talking about. Can you make one for me? And how much do you charge? It's like, let me get back to you on that. So yeah, I just kind of fell into doing all that. And, over time, as I had to like make my way in the world and make a career, realized that this is a good career to have. So I just went for it and, shuffled through a bunch of different languages and technologies. And I think right around the time Rails 2 was starting to get, popular, 2007, 2008 timeframe, I think. That's when I heard really suffered through the PHP world at that time and looking for something different. And I mostly have contracted through this whole time. And one of my big client projects, they were all into Spring and Java server pages, I think is called JSP and all this different stuff. And anyway, Ruby on Rails was a breath of fresh air. So I got into Rails, and that really kind of led me to sort of morph from thinking of myself as a web designer, quote unquote, to thinking of myself as a Rails developer. Did that for a number of years. But I've always had this sort of perspective of I like working on websites, like, marketing websites, you could call them, business websites and, sites, e-commerce and just different things that are public facing and less about the software side of it. But there wasn't a good solution, in my opinion, like in the Rails world directly. The kind of CMSs you've seen come and go over the years in Rails, like Refinery, for example, was okay, but it seemed like it was trying to do a copy of WordPress and not necessarily that great of a job of that. And just because it was Rails, I didn't feel confident recommending that to clients. And then I found Jekyll, and so this was like in 2015. And once I found Jekyll, I was just super thrilled because, it's built in Ruby, uses things like the Liquid template engine, which I'd already been familiar with and really liked. I like having all the content in a Git repository, so everything's version controlled and traceable by default in that way. So I just fell in love with it, and then had to start thinking through, how do I build around this technology so clients can still edit their content really easily? Because I don't want to tell them, go over here to GitHub and click the edit button and start typing text. So I ended up sort of essentially building the editor piece as, custom Rails software, and that would just interface with Jekyll repositories under the hood, and kind of, went through proof of concept to turning it into a Rails engine, and then started thinking, maybe this Rails engine should really be a thing, and I should promote that as its own like open source software package where like, hey, install this engine and now your Rails application can edit Jekyll sites. So I was really starting to push hard on that last year and into the beginning of this year. But meanwhile, on another client project for about the past year, I was working on a completely different thing. It was Next.js and TypeScript and Node and this whole different set of things. And using all the latest hotness that's in the Jamstack world, as folks are calling it now. So, I was getting this whole perspective around working with React components and working in this, full stack JavaScript, TypeScript type ecosystem. And, in a lot of ways, it's been great. I've learned so much from that and gotten, a lot of interesting ideas and things to think through in terms of how that affects developing websites. But at the same time, there were so many instances where I was wrestling with, all these crazy configuration things and all the different compilation steps that you have to go through where everything's going through everything else. You run into a problem and it's like, is this TypeScript? Is this Babel? Is this Webpack? Is this Next.js? Is this React? Is this something we're adding onto React? Like some of the error messages are just Byzantine when you're working in that complicated of a stack. And all this work we're doing to build something that in the end is just mainly a static website deployed on Netlify. So like the actual interactive React kind of aspects of it are pretty minimal, at least so far. And so I'm working on this whole thing and I'm thinking we could almost do everything we're doing here with something like Jekyll, and it would be an order of magnitude easier. Like probably would take half the time to do any one thing as we're working on this. So, so I kind of had that perspective and then was thinking, in order to sort of come out with a statement, along the lines of, hey, this stuff can be way easier with Jekyll. You should try that out. I felt like, I should try to see if there are ways that I could contribute to Jekyll directly, as an open source project to, maybe see if we can fill some of the gaps in functionality. A big thing being Webpack. Like, everyone seems like they've kind of standardized around using Webpack, or at least something similar to Webpack for managing all the front-end assets. Rails has Webpacker now, for example. So Jekyll has had, this very aged kind of, hey, we can compile some Sass files and some CoffeeScript, and that's pretty much it. And it's been there for years and no one's really touched it. So anyway, long story short, I approached the Jekyll team, filed an issue, said, hey, is there a future roadmap for Jekyll? I think, we could kind of do a short list of some really cool things and then really promote this, as a solid Jamstack solution alongside all these other tools that are out there now, like Gatsby and Next and 11T and Hugo and all these other static site generators that are pretty well known now. And, didn't get the response I was hoping for. It was cordial, but the sort of consensus was because Jekyll is so heavily tied in with GitHub pages, all the GitHub repositories, if a website directly attached to that, it uses Jekyll under the hood. But GitHub pages is set up a very specific way to work with Jekyll, and GitHub, as a company, is just not interested in investing resources into changing or enhancing Jekyll that much at this point. So, anything the community kind of wants to do to improve Jekyll basically should be done kind of outside of the project directly as like a third-party plugin or something. So I personally was kind of demoralized with that line of thinking. I mean, I understand it, but I wasn't particularly thrilled with it. So kind of went into a period of soul searching really just a couple months ago, thinking, do I need to just give up my dreams of being a Rubyist here and go over to the dark side? Use something like Gatsby or Hugo or whatever. And, started to go down that route in my investigations. But then in a local Ruby meetup, we have a Slack channel, and I was just kind of venting there, and somebody ventured forth, well, it is open source. You could always fork it. And I'd already kind of had that idea starting to percolate in the back of my brain. And I was like, no, bad idea. Don't do it. Stop. Don't even think about it. But then hearing someone else say it back to me without me even venturing forth that notion, I was like, oh yeah, I could do that. Sure. It's crazy, but sure, why not? So just as an experiment, I basically, downloaded Jekyll, renamed it to something else. It ended up being this new project, Bridgetown, and just started making improvements. And, one thing led to another. And here we are, a fairly short amount of time later. And Bridgetown is really a thing now. And I'm so excited and so grateful that I've been starting to get really, really good feedback, lots of ideas, lots of questions about, where it could go. And yeah, so it's been kind of a wild ride, but I feel like it's kind of a culmination of so much I've worked on over the years and really where I kind of want to push the Jamstack industry forward.
This is cool looking. I launched for some reason a couple of times a month, it seems, like a static site. And every time, like for a while, it was like, I'll fire it up in Gatsby. And then I get started in Gatsby and I don't know. I just didn't understand it well enough, right? And I would run into one problem and it would be like a night worth of work gone. And so I always end up coming back to Jekyll. But my problem is using certain things like Tailwind, which is very much installed through Webpack usually. And that was always a pain because I'm not very good at Webpack. And so I just use somebody's template that shoves Tailwind and Webpack into a Jekyll setup. And I have no idea how it works. It's just magic to me and I just use it. And so I think it's really cool that this exists with Webpack out of the box.
Yeah.
That's my biggest pain point with static sites. And this solves it. It's really cool.
Jason, I didn't know that you and I were the exact same programmer. And if I had known that we were both spending all night trying to debug a super small JavaScript problem in Gatsby, we could have done it together.
We could have.
Because I've been there, done that, but I've never even used Jekyll. So I don't even think to eject. I just submit to the pane. I just add TypeScript to make it better.
Always makes it better, right?
Yeah, it's fun because I've used Jekyll a fair bit in the past. It's not been a whole lot, but this is very much Jekyll with those little things that I was missing from Jekyll that I was always doing the same thing. Let's see how we set up, Webpack and Tailwind with Jekyll. I'll go find someone's repo and copy files out of it and try and set it up myself. So it's kind of awesome, to have that out of the box. And then anyone who's familiar with that already is, about writing your posts and putting them with the date and then the URL and .markdown or whatever. So it's a very familiar environment if you've ever done that before. And I also love, deploying stuff to Netlify because it's just stupid fast and easy.
Oh, it's so great. Yeah. But yeah, so the defaults thing is so much of what I feel like is kind of vital at this point with any static site generator, making some kind of impact in the market is to have not just one set of defaults, but an easy way to have any number of different defaults. So, taking a cue for example from Rails, something like having the ability to just stick a GitHub repo URL at the end of the new command and have it start off with that as a starter template. So that's not in Bridgetown now, but that's being worked on. And then, just making the out of the box defaults a lot more just ready to go in some really important ways. Webpack is one of those ways. Another thing is sort of the taxonomy type stuff. I can't even begin to tell you how many people come into Jekyll forums or whatever and have a question hey, how do I create a page that lists all the categories for my posts and then have a category page that lists all the posts of that category? And everyone sort of has their own take on how to do that. And there's a whole bunch of different gems that all kind of do that, but in slightly different and incompatible ways. And I'm just why isn't this just part of the experience? This is basic stuff. There's obviously a case to be made that, you can't put everything into one project. It's good to have different plugins and good to have, things that are sort of nice to haves, not being the core of the project. But, I think things like pagination or archive pages for a blog, it's kind of core to any website experience. It just doesn't make sense to me to have to go farm that out to something else. So things like that I've been really trying to focus on at this early stage, and then kind of over time, looking ahead over the next few months, it gets maybe a little bit more experimental and big sky thinking. But at this point, it's most of the work has been just to make that out of the box default experience better.
And I think this may be something I'll try and contribute, but like, simple, like a generate page or generate post, command for anybody who's never done this before. Yeah, you can always create it, by hand, but like a command to generate a post that just drops in the current date and whatever your title was, hyphenated, like those little things won't be much for you to maintain, but they'll make things easier for anybody new to use the tool. And like that was kind of the thing that like made Rails popular in the early days. Like just go build an app without having to deal with like, setting up your entire CRUD and all the routes and, your controllers and all that. You run Rails generate scaffold and you get all of these things.
Yeah.
You may have to change it, but like, that's fine, so.
Yeah, I definitely think we could, introduce more and more of those niceties. And, I never got into this, but back in the day, there was this whole set of gems called Octopress that a lot of people liked. That was kind of just added a bunch of stuff to Jekyll, but it was kind of all bundled together under this umbrella called Octopress.
I remember that. Yeah, I think one of my friends used that for his site. And I remember looking into it and then I was like, I don't think it's like enough to convert my Jekyll site over to Octopress, but
it was pretty like, opinionated. You kind of had to, buy into the Octopress philosophy to make the most use of it. And then, it kind of got abandoned over time for, I'm sure, entirely valid reasons. But I think it kind of meant that a lot of the people who otherwise might have wanted to contribute those things directly to Jekyll just didn't. And then, here we are just kind of missing some of that side of things.
Yeah, it's like the million different Linux distros and stuff where it's like difference of opinion and then it gets abandoned after a few months when they realize how hard it is to maintain and whatever. Yeah. Like I've built a couple static sites recently and went the route of like, do I look into Gatsby or something else? Because I don't really know the state of the world with Jekyll. Like, do the maintainers consider it kind of done and they're not going to be adding things like pagination and whatever that you probably want, And so it's nice to have Bridgetown kind of saying, look, we're going to actually set a roadmap and like make a direction to go forward. And, you're buying into this and, it's going to have a future, which is nice because I definitely questioned that with Jekyll. And I was like, my stuff's simple enough that I don't even need pagination or whatever. So I'll just use it. But if I was looking to do anything a bit more complex, I wasn't sure if that's what I wanted to do because I knew Gatsby is going to be supported for longer just with how popular it is. But, it's important to kind of know that going into a project for, if you're going to have to maintain it for 10 years or whatever, then you're going to want to know that the maintainer is going to continue working on it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the core team still working on Jekyll right now. They're all super capable, and the actual activity on GitHub itself, it has been pretty steady for a long time. But it's just been a really slow release cycle, and the kind of things that get worked on are very low level, sort of slightly make this class faster by changing this one line or something, and all important stuff, but it's I think we're at a point now in the industry where the kind of like what we saw maybe in the Rails world a few years ago, where there was just such a massive influx of new people, new talent, boot camps, all this kind of stuff around something else, and in the face of that, either give up or you step it up, right? That's my take on it anyway. So it's like, hey, like, there's so much inertia and honestly, like big VC money in some cases. There's so much inertia now, so much momentum behind these new frameworks like Gatsby or Next.js or or even things like Hugo. How do we respond to that? Do we just embrace it and go that direction, or do we try to step up the game here a little bit in the Ruby world and see if we can, maybe get inspired by a few of the good ideas, but also do some things different, do things the Ruby way, just like, Rails has evolved and grown over time, but at the same time, it's still, there's still a Rails way and there's still philosophy. And some people really like that philosophy and they want to go in that direction. I certainly do. And also another thing that I don't want to get too far down in the weeds here, but, with the Jamstack, talking about static sites, there's kind of a push now to go beyond the idea of, hey, your public marketing site could be a static site and, you can do all that. And then you have your separate application, maybe that's still a standard CRUD server-side application. Now there's this push where, hey, your sort of front-end basic, initial state of your application, everything starts out as a static site being served through a CDN. It's on the edge. And then you start to add in, calls to APIs and, use serverless functions and all this different kind of stuff to bring in user authentication and grabbing some particular data out of a database. And, so if you kind of go to the app in your web browser, you can almost visualize the header is mostly static and maybe the sidebar is mostly static and the footer and maybe certain elements of each page or, all this stuff can get pre-rendered. And then you just sort of, ingest the bits of the page that are specific to a logged in user or specific to if you have content behind a paywall, looking at, your site, Chris, Go Rails, for example, you could almost imagine hey, you have all these, pages, all these different videos and all this stuff. Theoretically, a lot of that could be rendered statically. It could all be on the CDN. And then you bring in certain things like comments or the videos that are behind a paywall, maybe, some of those elements are static, but some of those things are essentially blank in the static version. And then it gets pulled in, the actual video gets pulled in through a call to a Rails app or something.
Yeah.
So there's all these new ways you could start to think about this stuff. But the challenge here, sort of almost an existential threat, you could say, coming from a traditional Rails viewpoint is, if you start to go down the road where, you use something like Next or Gatsby to build this elaborate static front end and Rails, just kind of shrinks down to the role of just being an API, then the question becomes, well, why do we need this API to be something in this different language and this different technology? Let's just have one stack to rule them all, which is exactly what you see now with the new project, Redwood.js. I don't know if you've all heard of that, but it's headed up by Tom Preston Werner, who, in a very bizarre twist, is actually the guy who invented Jekyll, as well as GitHub.
That's funny.
Co-founder of GitHub.
It's still an itch then that he's trying to solve.
Yeah. So there's now this full stack, but also kind of Jamstack approach with Redwood.js, where the idea is to cache and generate as much stuff up front as possible and push it out to the edge through a CDN, and then just kind of sprinkle in all the interactive bits with React components and GraphQL and serverless functions and all these buzzwords, right? I'm not here to debate if that's a good approach or not. All I know is that's not how I want to build web applications. Personally, it's just that's not an approach that interests me. I like Rails. I like what Rails can do. But at the same time, I think, are there ways that we can take parts of what you do in a Rails app and bring them into the Jamstack and have sort of this hybrid approach? So that's kind of some of the blue sky thinking that I'm sort of challenging myself with right now with Bridgetown, and hopefully in a few months, some of those ideas can maybe get out for wider discussion.
I don't know if you guys have seen this, but I thought about this earlier when you were talking, and I have to bring this up. Anytime you mention any static site generator on Twitter, there is always at least one person who will come out of nowhere, regardless of the content of your tweet, and be like, "Hey, have you heard of Hugo?" Which I've been noticing recently, and I think it's hilarious.
That's
yeah.
Is it a real person? not a bot.
No, they're they're like watching. They're watching the keywords, man. And when they
funny.
see that keyword, they jump.
Oh man, that's good.
I see that more for Gatsby actually, and
Really?
the thing that's really wild is if you go to Gatsby's documentation and browse around there a bit, there's actually a page that you can get to that's basically like how to evangelize everyone to use Gatsby, and here's how Gatsby will make your career awesome. And it's like this like really like kind of pushy marketing thing that like first time I saw it, I was like, what?
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
but they're trying to run a company off of it. So it makes sense that they're trying to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd totally expect to see that on like a like the commercial vendor site, but this was just in the open source tooling documentation.
I'm looking at the Redwood site and I'm just trying to understand. Like I'm looking at, there's a thing like it says how it's organized, and it's like GraphQL endpoints, custom functions, chunks, and all this stuff. And I'm just wondering, like, do I just not have the same problems that like every other developer has? Because this doesn't seem like it would solve the problems I currently work on very well. It seems like just a lot of pieces everywhere.
It kind of feels like a lot of these are, they're pulling data from somewhere else and trying to generate a static site from it. So I guess maybe their goal is to allow non-developers to create content that gets published into, their static site or something. I haven't quite figured out what the use case is for some of that stuff, but I've noticed that there's quite a bit of like pull in stuff from all these different sources and generate a static site from it. So maybe there's something there, but I haven't had that need personally. No.
See, I've thought about on Field Help making it like trying to make it to where when people save like help desk articles, that it actually like were to generate their marketing site as a static site. Like it's not necessarily a thing I need. I just want to do it for the challenge. But even then, like I don't know if these are all the like hoops I have to go through.
Yeah. Or is it like, if you do aggressive fragment caching on that stuff, like, is it really going to be that much better for you?
Right.
Or page caching really, because you won't necessarily need the user to be signed in or anything for some of those things. Yeah. It is interesting because user base and what Derek Reamer was working on, and there's some service bot and some other like payments tools, and then it was a big popular thing for a while, and it's not anymore. But like hosted comments somewhere else that you just drop in JavaScript for, like Discuss went downhill. I'm sure it was like funding and related things because I think they were a funded startup or whatever. But like there's so many things these days that you can just drop into a static site that, like you were saying, Jared, you could easily build Go Rails, for example, with a static site, and then just have some sort of ID that gets, the Wistia video added or whatever, the private video, whenever the user signed in or whatever as a paying customer. It's kind of fascinating that you really could do that. It doesn't feel like a valid option for some reason, but you absolutely could do that. Just because I'm a Rails developer so much, I don't feel like I want to go that route, or I worry maybe about, if I want to add other features, then I'll have to, not have it a static site or something. But it is interesting. There's a lot of potential there now that there wasn't back when Jekyll started and stuff.
It's like the mental, like wrapping my head around it sounds interesting. Like it sounds like a fun challenge. It just doesn't sound practical for me. It's a thing, but I don't know. I'd not heard of Redwood before today.
I think it's such a bifurcated sort of industry now with, the differences between, a quote unquote website and a web application can be really vast. And then even within those two buckets, you have, like a site being like, hey, here's my blog. And then a site being, like the front page of Amazon.com, right? So you have this that vast degree of difference in terms of both traffic and complexity. And so I think, the Jamstack stuff's interesting in that it can really address some nice things on the very low end, if you will, literally the person that just wants a blog. It can be so great for that from a developer experience standpoint. If I even think now of what I would have to do just to get WordPress set up on my computer and get everything set up in the database, and then figure out how to transfer the database to a remote server, and just for a blog, there's so much overhead there, right? But then at the same time, you have a lot of companies and hosting services, Netlify among them, pushing Jamstack stuff for cases where it's really high visibility, high traffic properties where you have to have as much stuff cached through a CDN as possible, because you just have millions of people going to your pages, every single day. So it can solve problems at scale, coming from that perspective. Otherwise, I guess you'd have to, host your dynamic application through something like Heroku or directly on AWS or something, and the costs there are astronomical. But then there's this kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, middle ground of internal business applications and SaaS applications startups working on it. All these cases where, this sort of in this middle territory, a more traditional Rails kind of application architecture completely makes sense still. And the developer experience there is so great. Yeah. So it's just, it's interesting. I think we're at a point now where every project and every use case and, where you are in the industry, what the problems are, the question of which technology is the best, it's gotten hard to answer, with a sort of pat answer.
So we've kind of steered off a little bit into talking about static sites and Jamstack, et cetera. But I would like to steer back a little bit towards Bridgetown, because I have a few questions, thoughts, comments that I thought would be interesting to discuss. Number one, Chris was right about generators, making it super easy. And Chris, if you are interested in adding that, I'm down to pair this weekend. Maybe we can cook it up. But one thing that Gatsby came out, I think partially the reason Gatsby got so popular or is so popular is because of their theming. And I've been seeing you doing some preliminary work to kind of support plugins and themes like that. And I think that is 100% the key to making something like Bridgetown really get a market share. And the other thing is, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but Gatsby released something called Recipes, which is basically a way to run commands from the CLI to cook up certain things, like adding Tailwind, for example, to your Gatsby site. I think that would be the feature to add.
That does sound cool. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the dream. The dream is I can quickly come in, I can quickly add Tailwind, I can quickly get my things situated without copying and pasting from old repos. But so you've kind of got, it's pre 1.0. Is there any danger to running it in production?
There's not really any danger because, it's a static site, right? So if it's building something incorrectly or, really messing something up, you fix that in development so that once it's pushed to production, the idea is the output should be identical to your development output, unless you do something that's specifically configured to be environment specific. So, I have the caveat that a little bit of caution here if you're thinking about using this in production, mainly just because this is a new tool and, I would feel bad if someone just immediately jumped on it for some giant project and ran into a weird bug and got mad, so there's a caveat there, but, basically it can be used for production. And we do, our own Bridgetown site and an increasing number of other sites I'm working on, including some client projects that I'm working on now.
Is this something I could put inside of my Rails app? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. I believe Justin Searles was just working on a gem called Static Rails. I'd have to look that up again, but the idea was to make it easy for, in his case, he was looking at doing that with Jekyll, but basically making it a little bit easier to drop a static site into a folder within your Rails repo and just have that get served through, rack, I guess, and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, I mean, it can be done. I think you possibly lose the benefits of having a site that you can immediately deploy directly to Netlify or something like that every time your Git repo's updated. But yeah, it's certainly a possibility.
One thing that I've been really like noodling on is like at CodeFund, at this point I'm the primary developer, and I care a lot about the fact that like a lot of time I have to spend coding features is spent like configuring the UI, and it's really become like this like block in my mind that I can't get around. Like I want like an easy, coherent way to build the UI, which is why I've been so big on Vue Component and I'm big on Gatsby and all this other stuff that I do. But I was thinking the other day, like what my dream use of Bridgetown would be is to maybe not in the Rails app, but I would love to be able to like source like all my Vue components that are in my Rails app and like my like assets and like slurp them into like build like a design system like application or like front end or something. Because I've seen people do that with Jekyll and I've seen people do it with other things, and I would love to be able to do that in like an easy way that just like hooks in, and I don't have to do funky stuff, and I don't have to like I don't have to like put my components in an engine or my styles in an engine and then pull from there. Like that's not kosher.
We do that at Podia. We have I was talking earlier about how we have like our line in the sand with the Bootstrap 4 stuff. We have a middleman like repo that is also like the source of truth for all our assets, like our new assets and our like style guide. So the middleman site serves as documentation for our styling, and then it's a NPM package that we bring into our Rails app.
So since you guys are proprietary, are you guys hiring? So I can just slip in real quick.
What?
I want to see this. I want to see it, Jason.
I'll ask. I can probably show you. I don't think it's like, you could just right click and inspect element and see our styling. So I don't think it's like top secret. So
I want to see like the middleman part.
Yeah.
I could pass for Andrew Famera, right?
Yeah.
Force pushes to master too, right?
Yeah. All you have to do is just be like, forgot password and use his email address, and then it'll be good.
Golden. Yeah. But that's kind of
that is the dream, right? To have a design system and a way of defining your U collection of components, and then you can consume that in Rails or consume that directly on the static site. Yeah, I think the challenge today, of course, is you mentioned the Vue Components project specifically, and I'm a huge fan of that as well. I think that adds a lot to the Rails ecosystem. But it's right now it's completely dependent on Rails in particular, and also the template engine of Rails with ERB or Slim or whatever. So that's a challenge. We are trying to cook up something kind of cool though with the Liquid template engine that Bridgetown uses. We're working on this thing we're calling Liquid Components, where it basically kind of goes beyond just simple partials and into a territory where you can have a component with metadata that says, hey, this component takes these variables in these formats, and here's the name, here's the description, here's some previews for how to configure these different options for the component. And then essentially what you get is, this kind of storybook.js kind of approach where you have this design system that you can look at and say, okay, here's how you use the button component. Here's how you use the card component. Here's how you use, pagination previous to next buttons. And, you can set up all these things and have this sort of source of truth documentation and ways of using these things. So that's under active development right now. It doesn't solve your problem, Andrew, because you can't use those in a Rails app directly. But, hopefully over time, as folks with entirely too much time on their hands late in the evening put their heads together to solve this, it'll happen somehow.
I want that.
I was going to ask you, since like these are all static sites, is this something where you might go and, make the call of like having turbolinks on by default? Because it would, it wouldn't hurt anything really. And you would be able to just get quicker page views. And I was curious if you were using something like that on the doc site, because it looks like the content's loading in the center a bit, instead of just a static page load.
Yeah, so the Bridgetown site documentation and all that is using actually a library called swap.js. And it's very much like turbolinks. I mean, I actually was kind of planning to use turbolinks. I've used turbolinks before on Jekyll sites, but I came across this swap project, and it's actually pretty cool because it lets you do these animated page transitions really easily, and just a couple other little niceties. Swap, SWUP.
I was looking for the wrong thing. Okay, thank you.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of adding that to the sort of default site scaffold, I think that's actually a good idea.
Yeah, it's just, with Webpack and everything as a default feature, like you can throw in a little bit of opinionated stuff like turbolinks and stimulus or whatever for adding things that might be nice in there, simple delete that package or like line of code in your JavaScript file, and like you're done. You don't have to use turbolinks if you don't want to, which is nice.
Yeah, I think it'll get easier to add more opinionated stuff once we get the sort of, composer or recipes or whatever you want to call it, where you can be like, yeah, just, give me a blank site with virtually nothing loaded, or, give me, one with Tailwind installed, or give me one with stimulus and turbolinks, or, just kind of have these different options that are really easy to start with.
Yeah. Are those things on the near term roadmap or a little further out, or where's that sit?
Pretty near term. Yeah.
Cool.
It's kind of the main upcoming thing I'm starting to focus on.
Nice. Yeah. It feels like in theory, it shouldn't be too bad. It's probably going to be more of the interface of how you select those things. Cause I imagine adding a yarn package is not going to be super hard. Just how you define those and, the internal structure of adding those plugins or recipes or whatever will probably be the most of the work. But I would imagine.
Yeah, I have a branch currently that is actually kind of cool in that if you have a separate gem that you're adding, with just putting it in your gem file, the spec of the gem can include a bit of metadata that says also install this yarn package.
Ooh, that's cool.
So when basically anytime that gem shows up, using bundler or is updated in some fashion, Bridgetown will inspect that metadata and say, oh, look, we need to check if this package is installed from the NPM registry, and it just uses yarn to install that, which is pretty sweet. So I think, figuring out, the interface for the command line to, find and install things in the first place, we got to work on that. But the actual mechanism of getting, Ruby and NPM to play nice with each other is actually kind of getting there now, which is exciting.
Yeah, that's super cool. I like that idea a lot because I don't know how many times that I've gone through my app and run bundle update and then forgot to update the node modules or whatever for the equivalent version, and then they're out of sync. And it would be super awesome to have those linked together somehow, especially if it's stimulus reflex or, a gem like that has both JavaScript and a Ruby portion.
Yeah. The thing that's challenging initially is, a single Ruby gem might rely on a bunch of different, JavaScript or CSS packages and whatnot. So how do you specify that? So essentially what I did is, in your gem, all you have to do is just create, a simple, create your own new NPM package and just sync the version number with the gem version number. And then that package, literally all it could do is just say, I have a bunch of dependencies. So you could have, Tailwind and Stimulus and all these other things just as dependencies, and the package itself virtually doesn't do anything. And then publish that. And then that one package is considered the one dependency for the gem. and then everything just comes through. So, it's a tiny bit of boilerplate if you're the author of the gem, but that means that, you can just define all the dependencies that you need to define through your package.json, and it'll just all roll right into Bridgetown, which is pretty neat.
Yeah. What Stimulus Reflex is a gem that is also has JavaScript, like its own JavaScript package, similar to how Active Storage and Action Text are. But it is not I don't see a lot of people doing it. And it is not easy to kind of get the best of both worlds. Like we hit something just last night where Ruby or Bundler wanted the version number to be a certain way and Yarn wanted it a certain way. And Nate's been pulling his hair out with like trying to like work inside of the repo the best way and like releasing. And I will say this, if you are maintaining a gem like that, where there is a JavaScript package and a Ruby gem, the Rails release command on the main Rails repo probably has all the pieces you need, because I am hardcore swiping that, because they basically have a way for you to like bump both, but also make sure the version numbers are the right way for Node and the right way for Bundler.
Oh,
So
that sounds
side tangent,
cool.
but yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how to do it in an automated way, and I was just like, just make sure you remember to update the version number. But that's always a bad idea, right? So it'd be great to automate that.
There's also what we do in Stimulus Reflex is there's a gem post install command that hangs off a gem specification in your gem spec file, and it literally will just post like a message after the gem is finished installing. And whenever you install a new version of Stimulus Reflex, we basically emit a reminder that you need to update the NPM package as well. And it's the same for the NPM package. When you update that, we let you know, like, hey, just make sure you updated the gem as well.
Okay.
That's like the best we can do. Cool. So we've been going for a little bit. Jason, Chris, you guys have anything you want to touch on?
No, I think that.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I don't think anything. I just need to go play with this, and like, it seems like it will be a good alternative to, because at some point I need to redo my personal site and I want to use Tailwind for it. So it'll probably be a good opportunity to dive into Bridgetown, and then Andrew will have to see about building those little generators to generate a post and a page.
Yeah, I'm down. I also would be remiss. I checked out Bridgetown the other day just in preparation for this podcast. And the first thing I was like, all right, I want Tailwind, because I always want Tailwind. And I was able to add it in way less time and way less friction than I thought I was. Like, I was prepared for like an ordeal. And because there was no ordeal, like, and it was so fast, like that I was able to like install the gem from Ruby Gems, create a new site, add Tailwind with Post CSS, and then deploy it to Netlify with like purge CSS, like ripping out everything I'm not using. That it took me so little amount of time to do that I actually went ahead and just wrote up like a quick blog post that we can link in the show notes if you want to check out Bridgetown. And also, like, me and Jason, and I guess Chris too, are very, very obsessed with Tailwind.
Yeah, I'm excited to give this a whirl because this is, like I mentioned earlier, like the perfect use case for me of like, I just need to build something. I want a little bit of modern JavaScript asset tooling because I've gotten used to that with Rails. So this is perfect. I'm excited to try it. I'm also really appreciative of all the other things I learned about today, like Searls' static project, this swap stuff. I have lots of things to go and look at after this. So appreciate you sharing all that. Well, Jared, anything else before we wrap up? Any places on the internet you want people to find you at?
BridgetownRB.com. You can find me on GitHub, Jared C. White, on Twitter, Jared C. White. And yeah, just, contributions. Like, this is fun to work on, but after a while I feel, like, man, I'm, just kind of working on stuff and I don't know, like, is this the best approach? Is this what everyone's going to want? Is there a better way to do it? So, please go, file those issues. find me in a forum and yell at me. Like, it's fine. I just, and any feedback is good feedback right now. Let's push this forward.
Is that the best way for people to contribute to the project right now? Like, in terms of just like your average user who may not want to like actually dive in and like add features themselves, but want to support you and support the project?
So community.bridgetownrb.com is a discuss, one of those two. I always get confused. It's a forum there. So if you're less technically inclined and just have a question or a comment, that's a pretty easy way to get started.
Cool.
Well, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, and I will talk to the rest of y'all next week.
All right. See ya.
Later.
This podcast is brought to you by our friends at Linode. With 11 data centers worldwide, including their newest data center in Sydney, Australia, enterprise-grade hardware, S3-compatible storage option, and their next-generation network, Linode delivers the performance you expect at a price that you don't. Get started on Linode today by going to linode.com/remote Ruby.